Welcome to the EoE Guru Podcast. I'm Brent from EoEGuru.com, and we decided to put this podcast together because there's just a whole lot of confusion out there and a lot of stuff out there that we try and read and keep up on and keep up with everybody on all the things they're experiencing with this wonderful new disease called Eosinophilic Esophagitis. Thankfully, they coined it EoE for short because it's a mouthful to say, and as any of you with it have tried to explain to your relatives and friends what you have, it's kind of a tongue twister and challenge. My kids have taken the challenge to learn how to pronounce it, and they can all do it, but it takes time. But welcome to this podcast. This purpose of this podcast is to bring together just a bunch of knowledge around EoE. It's a new disease. It's been around for a while, but they didn't really know what it was or name it or anything until the 90s. And it's just been in the last handful of years that a whole bunch of people have been diagnosed, and it seems to be getting a lot more prominent. And so there's good news about that we'll talk about in the podcast. But it's this brave new world of this EoE disease that everybody's trying to figure out for themselves, because it is kind of like a needle in the haystack. It's not one solution fits all. Everybody has something different. Their allergies are all different. So it's a journey to figure out the disease for you. And we've decided to put this together to bring together a lot of knowledge that will help everybody figure themselves out, trial until they find the things that work so they can find relief. So that's our purpose, and that's what we'll be bringing together in this podcast. And we'll be talking about everything from symptoms to what causes them, to how to deal with them, to what the treatments are, what the latest technology, what are the latest things that doctors are doing, what doctors are foremost in this disease of EoE world, what to ask your doctor, and just all those great things that everybody needs to hear. And so first and foremost, let me say this. If you have EoE or know somebody with EoE, don't panic. EoE is not a life-threatening disease for the most part. It is an inconvenient disease, but you'll read all kinds of things on Facebook and blogs and everything else about people sharing their terrible symptoms and experiences and things, and it scares everybody to death. But just take a second, take a breath, and just realize this is an inconvenient disease that it takes a little bit to figure out, but you're on a journey to figure out. And don't let the hysteria of what you're hearing other people say scare you, because I'm a little bit of background on myself. I've had this my whole life. I'm early 50s now, and I've had it since I was a little kid, before they ever knew what it was, and I've struggled with it and gone through all the things that you go through with EoE. My first dilation so that I could swallow was when I was about 21 years old. And back then it was barbaric because I didn't even go under. I was awake for the whole thing. They drugged me so I didn't feel as much. But it was like I was fighting my doctor. My body was convulsing because he's cramming this tapered tube down my esophagus to stretch it out so I could eat. And it was, today is so much better for EoE patients and people that have this disease than what it was my whole life. So I got a lot of experience with it. I know a lot about it because I've struggled with it my whole life. And in the last handful of years, since doctors have really figured out some great new things, I'm finding relief on certain things, but I still struggle with it. So I'll share my experiences with you and all that as we go. Let's get into pure definition. And so everybody that's new to EoE, let's talk about what it is. So eosinophilic esophagitis, say that 10 times real fast, and you'll get it down, maybe. It is, the pure definition is a chronic immune system response disease to something that your body looks at as an allergen, something to attack, something to reject, something that's foreign, that shouldn't be there. And the difference between other allergies and EoE is that EoE, the reaction is in the esophagus. So your body reacts to something that's either eaten or inhaled, possibly. And the result is eosinophils, these little white blood cells that have this reaction and have a result of scar tissue and inflaming and everything else in your esophagus that aren't supposed to be there, because eosinophils are not supposed to be in your esophagus. But this disease makes them go there, and they consolidate, and they pick their place, and they attack. They don't really attack, but I'll get a little technical on you. Eosinophil cells, I look at it like this. So the eosinophil cell is the gun. And what happens is the allergy happens. It summons the guns. The guns show up there, and the guns pull the trigger and shoot these little granules, they call them. And the granules are what causes the inflammation and causes the damage to your esophagus. So these little granules come out, and they attack, and they cause all this trouble in your esophagus, and they last for a little while. Even after the eosinophil goes away, shoots the gun and goes away or whatever, the granules have that reaction and cause the damage in your esophagus. So that's the result of what happens in EoE, pure EoE. You'll hear a ton of people talk about all kinds of symptoms that they have with their EoE, and that's great. I'm not here to say what is EoE and what isn't, but pure EoE is your esophagus and everything related to your esophagus that's happening because your body's having that allergic reaction. There may be 100 related things that people have with pain or with fatigue or anything else that might be related to EoE. I'm not concerned about those because those are, it's just all over the place. We could talk about those things forever, but I'm concerned in this podcast in the initial part with pure EoE and what people are struggling with when they have the disease. So that's EoE in a nutshell. Most people with EoE have multiple allergies. I'm a good example. I've always had food allergies. I'll eat something even when I was a kid. I'll eat something and my body reacts and my throat actually closes up like within minutes, and where it's really hard to swallow. And I have to drink. For me, it's been Dr. Pepper. My whole life, I've drank Dr. Pepper to keep my throat open because water never seemed to help me much or even make it worse. So I would always have Dr. Pepper with every meal or a soda or something. And there's something about either the bubbles, the sugar, the caffeine, or something in there. And probably not the caffeine because the root beer would help me too when I was a kid. But there's something in there that helps. And you hear a lot of people talk about drinking Coke if they have an impaction or if something sticks or whatever, and the bubbles somehow make it so it goes down a little bit better. But for me, that initial allergic reaction that I've had, that's not EoE, it's a separate allergic reaction, but it caused my throat to immediately close up, and I have to keep it open by drinking a whole bunch of Dr. Pepper or whatever I have at the moment. And so the connection there with EoE is that when my esophagus is inflamed and smaller, because what happens with EoE is those granules damage your esophagus, they cause inflammation and scar tissue, and it tightens and tightens and tightens over time until you get to the point where it's really hard for food to pass through your esophagus. And that's when you have a food impaction. Something gets stuck or you have trouble getting something down, and you become the slowest eater on earth, like many of us with EoE. Because it's just, we have to chew up our food so much, otherwise it's going to stick on the way down. The good news is most people have strictures, they call them. So it's a little place in your esophagus where it's really tight, and it's called a stricture, and it's hard for food to pass by that. Most people have that down low, to where if you swallow something, it's down low. Even if it gets stuck or impacted, as we call it, you can still breathe. So it's uncomfortable. It's terrible. It could be painful. You can't get anything like water or anything to pass by that potentially. And sometimes in the worst case, you have to go to the hospital, and they have to go down and knock it through or pull it out or whatever they can do to get you where you can eat again. For me, the bad news is that my stricture has always been up high, and it's a really long one. It's way up high in my esophagus. And mine gets to where I am the slowest eater in the world because I have to chew so much. But if I get something stuck, it's up high and I can't breathe. So my first choking experience was in high school. I was about a junior, and I'm eating a salad bar at Wendy's, and I'm eating some potatoes in the salad bar, and just didn't chew one of them enough. Wouldn't have fazed anybody else, but for me it was so tight and so small that it got stuck, and my good buddy had to give me the Heimlich maneuver in front of these ladies, and it wasn't pretty at Wendy's restaurant. So at a young age, I was experiencing that, and I felt that, and my doctor laughed and thought, this guy has just adapted to this thing that makes him a slow eater. He has to chew up his food so much. But to me, it's just the way it's always been for me. It's nothing out of the normal. I notice that I'm the slowest eater, but it's just the way it is. So before EoE was discovered, he would just wonder why this was happening to me, because there was no answer. So come the 90s, they finally figured out and said, all right, there's a common theme here, common thread. Let's call it EoE. And they've learned more and more and more about it. And the last handful of years, there have been so many people diagnosed with it. They've spent money, time, research, and specialized doctors on it to really figure it out. And it's a great time to be, if you have to have EoE, it's a great time to have it because there are more answers now than there have ever been. And there are more coming and more treatments and solutions and things that are happening. So it's great news and great time. Although there is no cure for EoE at this point. There are treatments you can do to help you feel better, make it better. Symptoms are less, but that's still to come. So let's talk about what are the symptoms of EoE. So we talked about allergies. Many people have environmental allergies and have them really bad that have EoE. Many people have food allergies with EoE or both. Many of us have both. And those food allergies cause the EoE to get worse and worse. The more you ingest or breathe the allergens, the more the eosinophils come and attack and do their thing. And the more dysphagia or difficulty swallowing is what it's called, the more that happens. And then it happens over time. It's a slow reaction. So here's the difference. EoE, there's food allergies that cause immediate reactions. And those really aren't the culprit in EoE because that's something you eat, you have a reaction to, and then you go, wow, I'm allergic to that. I got to stay away from that. And you do because you have that reaction immediately. EoE triggers are the things that you don't really notice because you can't feel anything immediately happen. So you can't identify them, but there's a slow reaction over time that just keeps getting worse and worse and worse because you keep ingesting whatever that allergen is. And because you don't know it's doing anything to you. And then eventually your esophagus is so small and tight that it's just, now you got to do something about it because you can't swallow or can't eat. So that's kind of the cycle for people with EoE. And then the worst case is when you have food impactions because it gets so small, you don't chew up enough, some food sticks, and then you got to go in and have it done. And so these strictures are really the only way to deal with them is either stop eating or ingesting whatever the allergen is, but we don't know what it is because it's hard to figure out what the trigger is for EoE. Or you go in and you have an EGD where they go in and dilate your esophagus with either this tapered tube called savory dilators, or they have a balloon, or they have a few different options to dilate your esophagus. And we'll talk about that in a later episode as well, and what those are and the benefits of those. But the answer is, at least that's the answer to make you be able to eat again. So for me, my experience has been, I've been dilated every 3 to 4 years, my whole life almost, starting with when I was 21 years old, because I just couldn't eat. So they would go in and dilate me, and I would be good for another few years because, again, it's a slow acting disease that goes slow. And then eventually I couldn't swallow anything again. I'd go back and have it stretched again. This is one of the areas you'll hear people freak out and talk about, oh, it's so dangerous to go in and have your esophagus stretched. There are so many risks. And so, yes, there are risks like any other surgery. If they have to put you out for anything, there are the regular risks of going under. And there's about a 1% or less chance of perforating your esophagus when they stretch it, depending on how bad it is and those ingredients around that. But still, they used to be scared of it years ago. They thought it was 10%. Chance or risk of tearing your esophagus or perforation, but they've learned over the years, and they've done so many of these, they've learned what to watch out for, how to do it, and the risk is down to less than 1%. So it's a safe procedure, and you got to be able to eat, you got to be able to swallow. It's way too inconvenient and really dangerous for somebody like me to try to eat. And when your esophagus is so small, I literally choked and got up high in my esophagus on a quarter of a small pill because I used to have to cut my pills up. And this was I don't remember what it was for, some kind of pill for cholesterol or something like that years ago. But I'd cut it in force, and a fourth of the pill got lodged in my esophagus and stuck there, and it wouldn't go down. So I had to try to get warm water down or something to get it to where it would dissolve enough to where it would go down. And during this time, I couldn't breathe. So it was a scary situation. So you don't want to get there. You don't want to have that. So I can tell you I've had, I don't know how many, for 30 years, I've been stretched every 3 to 4 years and stretched multiple times. I'll do it at least twice every time. And in the last handful of years, I actually was stretched 7 times in 2 years ago in 1 year. Because I was having such a problem, and it was just going back so fast, and I couldn't eat. So those dilations, it's a safe procedure. Talk to your gastroenterologist or GI about it. and they'll always talk to you about the risk, because there's risk there, but don't listen to the people freaking out on the internet of, oh, it's such a dangerous thing. Don't think about it. Just look at it realistically and talk to people that have gone through it and been through it a bunch of times, because I can tell you all my experiences. And to me, dilations are a life-saving event, because I can't eat unless I get dilated. And once I'm dilated, wow, is it a big difference. I can eat and I can kind of go back to a normal life after that. And I can try to figure out, okay, now what's causing this, and try and eliminate that, which is the real puzzle that we'll figure it out. But I'd be gone years ago if I didn't have those dilations. So again, that's the quick answer right now to people's strictures where they can't eat. They get dilated and then they go back, and now you got time to try and figure it out and then go back to a normal life as much as possible. Other symptoms you hear about is abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, food intolerance. Symptoms are a little different between kids and adults. Potentially, kids have, they don't eat. You don't know why. Just a lot of things around that. So you need to, depending on who's got the disease, look at the similar symptoms that you're seeing versus what they see in other patients, and then try and figure it out from there and use that as a baseline. So we talked about the good news with EoE. The good news is, other than choking, it's not life-threatening. You can figure this out. You can get somewhere with it. There are ways to improve symptoms with diet and or drugs and or other treatments, which we'll talk about. There are leading doctors in the country and I have one that's probably number 2 in the country. She's amazing. And her son actually has EoE. So she's very well vested in this disease, trying to figure out, and they're in the middle of new treatments. Like, for example, right now, to diagnose EoE, you have to go under, and they have to go do a biopsy in your esophagus. And that biopsy has to result in 15 eosinophils per high power field or more to be called EoE. And so they got to put you under to even do that. And then, of course, they have to put you under to stretch you if you want any relief. But even to diagnose the disease, you have to go through that process. And it's expensive. Your insurance company might not cover all of it. And especially if you don't have insurance. And then especially if you get dilated, it's more expensive for that as well. But that's how they do it. They're working on a scanner now that is able to scan your esophagus without having to put you under. And pretty soon, I think, hopefully, they'll be able to diagnose EoE, and especially diagnose how you're doing with whatever you're trying without having to put you under and do a biopsy in your esophagus. And I'll talk about the reasons for that. So number one, EoE is a patchy disease. It's not your whole esophagus, typically. Can be. I've had times where my entire esophagus is inflamed. But for the most part, for most people, this allergic reaction happens in patchy places. So in one part of your esophagus, you'll have a whole bunch of eosinophils doing their thing, going to town. And in another part of your esophagus, there's nothing going on. And so your GI might go in and do a biopsy. And a lot of GIs still to this day might go in and do a one location biopsy. And they'll pick a location somehow, because you can't see it when they go down. You can't tell where it is, where to biopsy. So they'll find a place mid-esophagus or something, and they'll biopsy, and it'll come back 0, and no eosinophils. And they'll say, you don't have EoE, no problem. But in reality, you could have EoE, and it could be really bad in other parts of your esophagus. So that's one of the reasons it's misdiagnosed a lot, is because these doctors that are good and experienced with it will take 3 biopsies or more, a lot of times more, and they're looking at, and they know where the right places to look to try to figure out, okay, I'm going to make sure I get in, and these biopsies are valuable. And that's how they figure it out, and that's their experience with it and all those types of things. So there are a lot of GIs that are new to EoE because I hear people talk about what their GI tells them. So you want to find the best doctor around you that's experienced with EoE and not just an experienced GI. So that's a lot of the good news with EoE. You got to think glass half full. And the other part is glass half full being it helps keep you skinny. So I know I would weigh a lot more if I didn't have EoE, because I could eat anything I want, and I would. And so it's helped me keep me skinny over the years, because I'm a slow eater, and that's actually good for you. Eating slower is good for you. They've shown in studies than chomping down your food and eating fast like a lot of my buddies do. And so, you have to pay attention to your diet with EoE. So you're paying attention to what you're eating. You're looking for healthy stuff. You're looking for stuff that doesn't affect you. And so there's a lot of good things that come out of having EoE. We just need to capitalize on those and be healthier and follow that. So again, part of the bad news is we're still learning. We're still experimenting with treatments and diagnosis and everything else. And we talked about the severity and how difficult it is to diagnose that. And it's kind of I call it the needle in the haystack disease, because those triggers that cause EoE are the needle in the haystack you're looking for. It could be an ingredient in food that you're eating, and it's sometimes really hard to figure out what that ingredient is because it could be in a lot of foods. Or you could be allergic, or you might have multiple triggers, and so you might exclude a trigger in stopping a certain food that you think might be it, but then you might introduce another trigger with a food you adopt to replace that. And so it's a needle in the haystack disease, because you got to find the triggers that cause your EoE, and you got to eliminate those. And here's the problem. First thing that your GI will tell you to do, because there aren't many options for this, they'll send you to an allergist, and they'll say, well, let's get you some allergy testing to see what we can figure out what you're allergic to. And you'll go in, you'll have the back prick test where they prick your back with all these little spots and figure out what your environmental allergies are. And you might have a ton of those, or you might not have much, who knows. So you'll figure out that you're allergic to grass and weed and blah, 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 all this stuff. And then you'll have food allergy test where they'll do a blood test and try to figure out what your food allergy, or it could be a prick test as well for food allergies, because they can do that. And so they'll have these tests they'll run on you, and they'll give you a list and say, here's all the environmental allergies, here's your food allergies. And they'll say, all right, the best we know is I'm going to tell you to stay away from the high allergy ones. So they say you're highly allergic to these foods, and highly allergic to whatever this other stuff is. And so just as a starting point, try to avoid those things and see if it helps. The problem is this: allergy testing does not reveal EoE triggers. EoE triggers are a certain reaction to a certain thing that's ingested, and it may have nothing to do with your other allergies. So you could be allergic to 100 things, and one of those could be your EoE trigger, and you could exclude 99 of them, and it won't make any difference with your EoE whatsoever. So that is the problem with EoE. That's the needle in the haystack. So if you're new to it, get ready to study and pay attention and try to do everything you can to find that needle in the haystack. But the good news with that is some people don't have many of those triggers, so they can figure it out, they exclude it, and they're kind of back to a normal life after that. I, on the other hand, along with a lot of other people, I have a buttload of allergies. So when I go to the allergist, they laugh and just think, well, is there anything you aren't allergic to? I can tell you that easier. So it becomes a little bit more difficult to figure out the disease. All right, we talked a little bit about how it's diagnosed, the 15 eosinophils per high-powered field. Another part of that is family history. So there seems to be a lot of evidence that there's a family history of it, myself included. My dad, I believe, hasn't been diagnosed, but he's always had trouble swallowing. My brother was diagnosed with it, although they have lesser versions of it than I do, because I've got it the worst out of my family, but I know they have it as well. My brother was diagnosed, but he can function. He's always been a slow eater too, but he gets through it. And we talked about the symptoms between children and adult. So, all right, now let's talk about the relationship between EoE and GERD. GERD is gastroesophageal reflux disease. So acid in your esophagus, the burning, heartburn feeling, that kind of stuff. So they're not, so let me just say, they're not directly connected. You can have EoE, not GERD. You can have GERD, not EoE, and you can have both. But so this gets a little tricky and a little complicated, because there has been a term called PPI responsive EoE. And what that means, PPI is a proton pump inhibitor. That is a medicine that stops your stomach from pumping acid. So what it does is it reduces your acid in your stomach, so that acid doesn't get up in your esophagus, and it just reduces that overall in your body, so where you're not burning your esophagus with acid anymore. And those work very well, and that's actually going to be your first line of defense from your GI when they diagnose you with EoE. They're going to want to get rid of that acid in your esophagus to make sure that's not causing the problem. And what they've learned is about 50% of people that go on PPIs have a positive response to their EoE by getting rid of the acid, by going on a PPI. So they coined the term PPI responsive EoE. They're questioning that a little bit nowadays, saying that, well, that might not really be a valid term. So that it's kind of up in the air. But the fact is, some people have relief just from going on a PPI. So that's fine and that's good. And hopefully you're one of those people, because that's easy. You'll hear people freak out about PPIs and say, well, they cause all these problems. They cause heart attacks, whatever the case is. It's not, it's another well overblown thing. There was a study that they tried to say that some PPIs increase the probability of having a heart attack of some sort or whatever. And I've talked to GIs, and the study was not conclusive that said anything about you're going to have a heart attack if you go on a PPI. So I've been on PPIs since I was 20 years old. So I've been on for 30 plus years. Never had any problem with any of them, and never even had any reactions or any symptoms of anything from it. And I know a lot of people in the same boat. On the other hand, you'll read about people that go on a PPI and they may have a terrible experience because they have who knows what. The question is, was that really caused by the PPI, or is it something else? So don't freak out about going on a PPI, because number one, most of the time it's very helpful and people don't have reactions or anything to it. And it's been, those medicines have been around for years and years and years. So there's no evidence that says you really shouldn't be on it. And the other thing is, having acid in your esophagus is in most cases worse than anything that's going to happen from taking a PPI for many, many years. Because acid in your esophagus can cause esophageal cancer over time because of the burning and scar tissue and everything else. And esophageal cancer, if you don't know, is one of the worst types of cancers that is very low survival rate. So you want to pay attention to that and be careful with that. So as a PPI, 30 plus year PPI user, wholeheartedly, they work and they have worked for me. And I've never had anything negative come from it. And again, I'll qualify that by saying other people will say they've had a terrible experience with PPIs for whatever reason, and I don't discount that. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. I'm just saying, for the most part, all the doctors that I've talked to, the risks are so low that they just don't even hesitate to prescribe them. Okay, so if you're new to EoE, you got a new diagnosis, don't fear. Settle down and just start to learn, start to listen. We'll go through these things. I'm going to fill in everything we can and fill in all the pieces of the puzzle so you can figure your disease out. You're not alone. There are a lot of groups on Facebook. Get into Facebook and start connecting with some of these EoE groups. But at the same time, don't put a lot of stock in what you read, because people have something happen to them and they blast it and it's the end of the world, and you're going to read that and get scared. But just focus on your own disease and look for the quality stuff, for things that can help you by looking at others' experiences in these groups and things like that. What to expect with EoE when you have it and when you're diagnosed: continued allergic reactions of whatever has been happening, unless you've drastically changed your diet, which is what you're going to do. So the first line of defense is going to be a PPI to stop the acid if you have acid reflux or GERD. You're going to want to stop the inflammation, and how you're going to do that is try to start looking at elimination diets, or start looking at eliminating something. If there's an obvious food allergen of some sort, and I know people that have had that, where they know they're allergic to something but they still eat it, they'll immediately exclude that and see if that helps with their symptoms. So you're going to start the needle in the haystack search and start excluding things that are top of the probability list to say, this could be the problem. Let me exclude it and see if I start to see gradual improvement in my symptoms. The other thing is, what to expect is whoever your GI puts you in touch with, an allergist. I'm not saying don't go to an allergist. I want you to go to an allergist and learn about yourself and learn about your allergies. Just don't think you have to exclude all those things because it might be your triggers. Start them intelligently. Start at the high ones and exclude your high allergies, and hopefully one of those is going to be your trigger, and you're going to start to feel better and see some improvement in symptoms. So just work with your doctors. Follow the kind of the process that is in place. PPIs, if your doctor prescribes them, look at food as a potential solution by eliminating foods that are high probability allergens. And then if that doesn't work, you're going to get into some medicines, and we'll talk about that in the next podcast, which swallowed steroids is one of the things that a lot of people try, that GIs will put you on to see. There are other medicines that are new now that they are prescribing and doing for EoE that have a significant impact, and we'll talk about those. So I'll wrap this one up by saying welcome to the club. It's a very exclusive club because EoE, the probability of having EoE is like 1 in 2,000 or something like that. I think I read. I'm trying to remember the stats, but whatever it is, it's really low. So you're a very special person or you're around a very special person, and you're part of an elite group that gets to go on this mission of figuring out your disease and finding the solution. And I'm here to help, and I help in any way we can. If you have any questions or want to talk about certain things or share your experiences, plug into the website, eoeguru.com, make a comment, tell me something, send me a note, whatever. Just let me be involved. Let me help in any way I can, because that's why I'm here, to try and help everybody figure this out. And again, welcome, and thanks for listening. Thanks for being here with me.